and welcome to Musicals with Cheese, and today I have an incredible guest that I get to chat about. Please welcome Tony and Emmy nominee Anthony King, a writer, producer, lyricist, songwriter, and book writer known for shows such as Silicon Valley, What's Hot American Summer, Wrecked, and musicals such as Gutenberg the Musical and Beetlejuice the Musical, but let's not forget If You Give a Pig a Pancake and other storybooks.
Wow. Going real deep.
Yeah, we're going deep today. Thank you so much for joining me today, Anthony.
It's nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
No, it's really a joy. I love almost all of you, like pretty much all of your work. Like all that I have seen is the only thing that I haven't enjoyed.
There's more to discover, hopefully.
I can't wait. But you've got an illustrious career, not just in Broadway, but all over the spectrum. But we're going to focus mostly on the musical theater side today, because that's kind of what this show is about.
Cool. That sounds good.
All right. First and foremost, how would you describe your relationship with musical theater, and what are your personal favorite musicals?
So, I discovered musical theater when I was in like middle school, I think, doing plays in school, which I think a lot of people find their way into. And then just kind of fell in love with the vocabulary of it, but also just I grew up in church, and I think music is a big part of church. And so I think just that collective sense of a giant crowd all on one emotional plane is a thing that only music can do. And when you mix that with story, I am on board, even though a lot of musicals are cheesy and weird and terrible. I love, the musicals I love. I like weirder musicals. I always say I'm really into William Finn's stuff because I think he just tells very personal stories and does it in really fascinating ways. And then, of course, Sondheim. But I like his, like Assassins is a musical that I really love, even though it's not something you think a musical should be able to talk about, but he finds a way to do it. But I think my favorite musical is A Chorus Line, because I just love how it doesn't stick to now there's a scene and now there's a song, and it instead mixes vocabularies in a way that I think is pretty revolutionary and isn't done a lot even now. It's still a very modern show, even though it's very dated now.
I agree with you completely. My next question is about you personally. We've talked about your influence within musical theater and what you love, but how would you describe yourself as an artist? Like your artwork and what your goals are as an artist?
I got into the reason I think I started liking theater. I started directing and then I got into writing. Was I really, and why I like musical theater especially is I really love collaborative art, making art with other people. And that's almost necessary in a musical where like plays often spring from one playwright, and they'll work with a director, but just creating with a lyricist, a composer, a director, that's something that I would just really gravitate toward. I also have a background in improv comedy, which is obviously creating with other people. So that's kind of the thing that I'm most interested in.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Perfect answer. I am very curious. You did not start off as like a musical theater. This is what I'm aiming to do. This is my goal. You started basically at the Upright Citizens Brigade, and you went to like Chapel Hill, University of North Carolina. So how do you start as a guy from North Carolina, eventually being a Tony-nominated book writer for a musical?
Well, I will say, growing up in North Carolina, I didn't really know that being a writer was a thing you could do, like as a life. I think it just wasn't like I was doing theater and I knew I didn't want to really be an actor. And that seemed like a hard road and also not what I love. But then I discovered in college directing, and I really liked that. So I actually originally moved to New York after college to direct theater. That was the plan. And I was doing that. I was assistant directing off Broadway, assistant directed Andrew Lippa's The Wild Party, a show called Summer of 42 that ran off Broadway. And I was directing, here and there, more off and regional stuff. And then I kind of was like hitting a dead end of just, do I get an MFA? Like, what do I do? And I found my way to UCB, where I was doing theater, but also directing shows there. And then I became the artistic director of the UCB theater and did that for about 6 years. And that's where I kind of transitioned into writing more. But the first thing I wrote really was this show, Gutenberg the Musical, that I wrote with Scott Brown. And that was based on my time at Manhattan Theater Club when I first moved to New York, when I was trying to break in as a director, where I was an intern in the musical theater department, and went and saw readings of musicals all the time. And it kind of started there.
And let me just say, in a post-Hamilton world, you really see how ahead of its time Gutenberg is. Like, I think it stands up more now than it really even did when you first did it in, like, 2011. Like, it is brilliant. And it, like, the small jokes, like, the Helvetica is, like, one of the best fucking jokes I've ever heard.
Yeah, it's one of those shows that it's like, when I was at Manhattan Theater Club, I would read, we get submissions of musicals, and most of them are terrible because most things people write are not very good. But with a musical, you would get a recording of songs, and you often be the composers singing songs from their show, and they were so passionate. And it was this amazing window of like, oh, these people don't have anyone in their lives to tell them that this is not good. And so that was the inspiration for Gutenberg, was that, can you write a show that is truly terrible, but if you believe in it and love it enough, does it somehow become good?
Because there is sincerity in there. You rode that fine line between harshly cynical, like, this is bad, and like, you gotta love it though.
Oh, that's right. And there is a structure to it. Like, and the BMI Musical Workshop in New York, which is a wonderful program and teaches people the basic structures of musical theater. And Gutenberg is kind of sending up that a little bit, where it's, you need the I Want song, and you need all these different things. Because I would also go see readings when I was there, and you would see almost, oh, these people did the proper things to make a musical, but the spark of inspiration that also needs to be there is not there. So you're just kind of watching a like by the numbers show. But again, you still, because it's musical theater, there's moments where it all comes together into this magical thing that I think is what we're all chasing.
Mm-hmm. And you have a collaborator, and your current collaborator on that show, forgive me for not having the name off the top of my head, it's Scott Brown. Scott Brown.
Scott Brown, yeah.
Yes. So how did you start working with Scott Brown?
I met Scott in 8th grade. I've known him most of my life. Yeah. He and I did those shows together in high school, and then went our separate ways in college, but ended up moving to New York at the same time for different reasons. He was becoming an entertainment journalist, and I was there to do theater. But when Gutenberg started, it started as a joke to like play. I wanted to submit a fake show to my boss to see what he would say about it. And so Scott and I were living together, and so we started writing songs, trying to come up like, what is the worst idea for a musical? And we thought the invention of the printing press is so not momentous as a moment. Like, it didn't happen in 1 second, and it also is not something you would sing about. So we thought that was a good, ridiculous thing to write a show about. And so then, just as we started writing it, we fell in love with our own bullshit and never submitted it to my boss. It became what it was. But that started us writing together. But even in high school, we kind of did dumb things, wrote things, and we made like a terrible sketch movie and things like that. So we were always kind of creating stuff together. And then over time, he's now writes television dramas mostly, and I write mostly television comedy. So we're both in TV as writers, but separately.
Mm-hmm. No, my next question, and I think everyone's big question, is how do you go from Gutenberg the Musical, which was this fun send-up, to something as big as Beetlejuice the Musical?
The answer is Alex Timbers. Alex Timbers, who directed Beetlejuice, he also directed Gutenberg off Broadway. And his career started taking off, not because of Gutenberg, but at the time that we did Gutenberg. I think that was his first commercial production. And his career started taking off, and Warner Brothers approached him, and he's, about doing a show together. And he said he wanted to do Beetlejuice and have us write it. And so we had were not qualified in any way to get that kind of job at that level. But we pitched our take on it and what we wanted to do, and got it. So, and then many years of development followed.
And now this is just a question for me. Like, what was that original pitch? Like, what was it like our version of Beetlejuice, and did it eventually become what was on the stage currently in 2019?
The cool thing was that from the very beginning, Warner Brothers did not want just to put the movie on stage, which was good because we weren't interested in doing that. But there are things from the movie that feel heightened and musical, and we knew I think from the beginning that like the Deo dinner party scene would be in the show. But Alex had an idea early on to have Lydia be the main character, and have Beetlejuice be kind of the MC of the show, as well as a character. And so those things were there from the beginning. And then we made a lot of choices of just kind of expanding Beetlejuice as a character. Once Lydia is the main character, what does that mean for all the other characters and how the story unfolds? And so there are a lot of changes from that. But like our original pitch, you saw Beetlejuice was a character and you saw him die at the beginning of the show.
Wow.
As a living person. So things changed over time. But that was in the original pitch. That did not make it very long. There was also a version of the show at one point which was completely bonkers, but luckily we were not fired after we wrote it, where Lydia was like the fast food restaurant Wendy's, the hamburger restaurant.
Yeah.
Lydia was like the Wendy's type logo on a chicken restaurant run by her father.
What?
She resented her chicken magnate father, was rebelling against him. It was insane, but but it was all exploring like, why is Lydia, at that time we had not landed on her having a dead mother, and so there was a question of just why is she as a main character, what's making her sing, what's making her have a story. And that was one of the more further afield ideas we had of what Lydia's thing was. She was a famous fast food icon.
I mean, you guys got there eventually, and let me just say, like, all that work has paid off, and this will be airing a few days after our official podcast about Beetlejuice, where we just talk about all the great decisions made with it, and one of them that we brought up is how you guys took small elements from the film and expanded upon them and make you feel like, why wasn't that there originally? It improves upon the original and adds to the stuff we like.
Oh, I'm good. That makes me happy to hear you say that, because that's something we've been very happy about, is that people who, at least the feedback we've heard from people who really love the film, get that the show is not just the film, but feel like it's kind of honoring what was there and not ruining it. And then, of course, we grew up watching the cartoon as well. So we've tried to put elements of that in there as well, where they're kind of, Lydia and Beetlejuice are he's almost her pet in the cartoon. And so he's like her magical pet. So we try to have a section where they kind of have that relationship.
Mm-hmm. And whereas the movie, I don't feel earns the title of Beetlejuice, this musical definitely does.
Well, the original title of the movie was House Ghosts. It was a pun on House Guests. And that's really what this movie's about, is like two different kinds of rich white people fighting over real estate. Which, we early on were like, that's hard to have people sing passionately about that, about the house and how it's being remodeled. So that was another reason why we kind of moved away from that being the main storyline.
Mm-hmm. Now, what do you think was the hardest, like, plot element to crack, like, in this, or character element? What was the hardest writing segment of this entire development?
There were two sections. The trickiest thing, honestly, was once Lydia is the main character, what do you do with the Maitlands? And that's the Alec Baldwin, Gina Davis characters, because they are the main characters of the movie. And it obviously, the story is taking place in their house. And so trying to tell a story where we still need to be in their house, have them die, and be part of the story, but also have it be Lydia's story and not have her story starting an hour into the show. was trying to figure out how to tell the beginning of the story was very tricky. And then the other part was when we made the decision that Lydia was going to go to the Netherworld instead of the Maitlands in search of her mother. Who goes with her? What happens there? Does she actually get to meet her mother or not? That went through a ton of different versions. And we even did a reading where she met her mother, but it was very clear to us that there was no way to write it that wasn't just saccharine, and also doesn't mean anything, because the whole point of death is that you don't get to see those people again. And that's part of grieving, as terrible as it is. And so when you get to see that happen, it kind of suddenly means nothing. So we knew we had to send her there and not give her what she wanted.
And I think that's also brilliant because, like, imagine how big our world is and how random it would be to run into like someone you knew from high school just on the street. Imagine that times 1,000,000,000, because like people have been dying a lot longer than people have been alive.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. We wanted to try to make it so it was like there is a possibility, but it feels fruitless. And then it's like that isolation and that search, is that the right thing to do? Because it's a show about grief and life and what it means to kind of move on. And we also bury that in a ton of ridiculousness, but at its heart, that's what it is. And so trying to make that also make sense when you're in this crazy fantasy world in the second act, all of a sudden, it took us a while to get to.
Mm-hmm. And did you guys ever have a hard time reeling in the fantasy elements of this? It'd be like, it's really about a girl dealing with the death of her mother, or was there ever a tug of war there?
Yeah, just because there's so much you could do. I mean, there's so much of just world building and the mythology of who is Beetlejuice and why is he like this and what does it mean and how much to lean into that and how much just becomes you just glaze over because you're kind of like, okay. And the movie gets away with a lot of it because it just kind of moves past it. But again, when people are stopping and singing, and Beetlejuice is only in the film for about 12 minutes. And he's obviously on stage in our show quite a lot. So it becomes like a lot. It becomes tricky to figure that out of like how much is too much and how much do you really care and how much does it matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So is there anything in the development of the show that was once like a big central part that you kind of wish was still in there?
I mean, there's a really funny thing that in DC in the show, when they go to the Netherworld, there was this boy band that sang a song, and people really it divided people. People either hated it or loved it, and it was cut for when we moved to New York and replaced with something I think makes more sense thematically and is probably better for the show. But there are people who still love the boy band and wish it was still in the show. We get a lot of like fans I'll see post on Twitter going like, I can't believe they cut Boy Inferno. But I think it was for the best. But that's the thing that I think of the most. That was the biggest change. Although there are tons of changes between DC and New York.
Yeah. Another question I have, and this is a process question. So you and Scott worked on the book alone. How would you describe the collaborative process between you and the songwriter, Eddie Perfect?
Yeah, it was interesting in that the show was written kind of strange. Like we were hired many years before Eddie came on board, which is not, I think, the ideal way to write a musical. But so we had written a script that had like places where songs should go. And we would kind of say, we think the song is this kind of song and does this kind of work for the story or the character, but without trying to write the song for that person. And then we looked for a composer. There were other composers attached before Eddie. But then we found Eddie, which was an amazing breakthrough because he's really funny, which is just, it's rare, I think, to have just hard comedy songwriter, and he's just a very, very funny writer. And so that's when the real collaboration began, because he wrote some of those songs we suggested, but of course, in other places was like, what if it was this kind of song, and that has an impact on the story you tell. So then it became a real push pull of figuring out the best ways to tell the story and what the story really should be. But it was a great. Eddie's fantastic.
Great. Well, now that I've got a couple questions about the post, like, how's it been, like, ever since the show has been up on Broadway and you've been thrown into the whirlwind? What was it like going to the Tonys, for example?
I mean, insane. I never thought I would be at the Tony Awards, so that was amazing. It's a lot of pressure. Your previews are crazy. Because you're watching the show every single night. You're looking at what works and what doesn't work. You're doing rewrites until late at the night, and the next morning you're putting them in rehearsal and watching it again the next night. And it's intense, and it's a ton of work. And then once you're open, you're kind of like left to, well, I hope people want to come see this. And so the exciting thing I think for our show was that once like the Tony Awards were a huge turning point for the success of the show, in that the performance on the Tony Awards where people actually got to see like, oh, that's what this show is. I think our like ticket sales went way up, and then the cast recording came out and people have really responded to the show. So it's been very cool to watch that it's like the show itself made people want to see it, which was exciting.
And that's great. That's a real word of mouth show that you can't really get with like films anymore, but musicals you still can. That's
Yeah.
basically the biggest marketing ploy.
That's right. Yeah, you have, because 1,000 people see it every night, and you're hoping those 1,000 people go tell at least 1,000 other people to come see it. So if you don't have that, you die pretty quick. So we feel very
Yes.
lucky. And then, of course, recently we found out we're huge on TikTok. So I didn't know what TikTok was before that happened, but now I do, and that's been really fun to watch. That people are just really grabbing onto the music, especially.
And the story and the fan base. Like, without the story that you and Scott kind of figured out and the rules that you guys set up that weren't there beforehand, I think those are some of the biggest elements why those songs hit hard. Like, I took someone to see the show, and they said, I did not expect to be crying. It was during the home parts and during the dead mom
Yeah.
parts. And it is shockingly emotional for Beetlejuice the Musical.
Oh, I'm glad. That's what we wanted. We wanted to like, hey, we're having a good time, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh God, this is actually really sad. And just because I think if it's just like Book of Mormon level, which is a amazing show, obviously, but that show's more a satire, and our show is more of a character, thing. So you kind of you want to go on that journey because we're not, satirizing religion.
All right, my next question is, how is the process different from like writing for TV than writing for a large Broadway show such as this?
I always say TV, they pay you to fail, and theater does not. Theater uh, almost never pays you. But I think TV is again, one thing I love about TV is it's collaborative. You're often especially in comedy, you're in a writer's room a lot of the time with other people trying to break the stories and figure out the best way to do it, which is my favorite thing to do. So that part I think is similar. Obviously, there's just more of a tight timeline with television. There's more of I think, relatability to the art form, where theater is just more cut off of who goes to it, and it's so expensive. It's a slightly different audience. But and then also theater just takes a long time because the development process is so much, okay, now we need to get a bunch of people in the same room to act this out for a couple of weeks and figure out what we have, and then go away and do more writing and then come back again. And that just ends up taking a lot of money and a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. All right. So now the final question, and what might be the most important question I ask you today. Please tell me about the writing process for If You Give a Pig a Pancake and other storybooks.
I'm curious, how do you know about that song? I tried to find it recently and couldn't even find it online. Have you heard it?
I have not heard it.
Okay.
I couldn't find it either.
So there's this, oh God, what do they call it? Theater Works, I think is what it's called. This company that does children's shows that tour around. And many years ago now, but after we had done Gutenberg, we were asked to write a song based on the children's book, If You Give a Pig a Pancake.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did. And it's now, I think, lost to the ether. But it was a very fun song. And I went and saw the show that they ended up touring, where they did a staged version of it with a person dressed as a pig and singing the song. It was a
Oh,
surreal experience.
that's incredible. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. And now I'm going to ask you the actual final question. What is next for you?
Oh boy, so I'm working on a bunch of TV stuff. I have a show that I just made for Comedy Central with the comedian Rory Scovel, who is very funny. And if you he has specials on Netflix if you are interested. But we just shot that. It's Rory Scovel, Sashir Zameda from Saturday Night Live, Beau Bridges from movie history. Are all in the cast. They're amazing, and that should come out sometime next year. I'm not sure when yet on Comedy Central. And I'm writing some other stuff for television, and then early stages working with Scott on something that might be a new musical. So for
Ooh,
Broadway.
ooh. That gets me excited because that hits my little heart, my musical theater loving heart, because I love the work you guys did, and I if it is an IP, I know you guys are going to take good care of it.
Yeah, well, it would be. I wish I could give more details, but it's still early stages and could all fall apart. But it would be really exciting if it happens, and it is. I mean, like everything now on Broadway, it almost has to be IP because you have. It's hard to get people in the door, but it's another thing where it's not something where we'd be locked in. We could do something kind of new with it, which would be really fun.
Well, that gets me even more excited even hearing you say that. That is fantastic, and I'm sure we'll do it on the show because that's what we do. So, do you have anything you'd like to promote? Twitter, Instagram, any of those things? Feel free to do it.
I'm on Twitter. It's the Anthony King on Twitter, and yeah, that's you can find me on there. I don't post that often, really, but I'm on there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Anthony, for joining us. I really do appreciate your time today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Thanks for liking the show. I'm so glad you like it.
Show's great, and I'm so excited to see what you do next because just seeing like more comedy on musical theater is great. Not everything needs to be Les Mis, you know?
Yeah, exactly. We should all be able to have some hard comedy in theater.
Take away your bluesicles, you know.
That's right.
All right, we'll see you next time on Musicals with Cheese.